Hello, welcome back. This is Colin Keeley here,
And I'm Brent Sanders.
and we are the co-founders of Avocado, an audio publishing platform.
And so this week, I think we wanted to talk about something different slightly. Well, maybe not different. I mean, in these episodes, we talk about how we build this company and the different approaches. Last week, we were talking about cold emailing. So, how to fill the top of funnel. And so this week, I wanted to talk about our dynamic a little bit between the two founders. So I'm playing the role of the CTO. I'm the technical co-founder. Colin is you're technical, but you don't necessarily code. I don't know. How would you describe yourself? I don't want to diminish your value, but you're not the technical co-founder.
I am not the technical co-founder. So I mean, my background, I work for a variety of startups in founding and then like product and marketing roles. So probably I'm most versed on the marketing side of things. And then I got my MBA. So I am one of those dreaded MBA people in the startup world. And
Right.
I probably am much more hands-on than you would assume like a strategy MBA person would be. So like I do the Webflow stuff. In the past, I've done like mock-ups of in Balsamic is what I used maybe 5+ years ago. So I have some exposure to product and like I could hack together Shopify sites and add plugins and that kind of thing. And I'd say I'm probably most versed on the design side of things. Like I've hired designers in the past. And then obviously business is, probably definitely what I'm best at, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got to give you props. You know enough to be dangerous, right? It's like, enough of like the concepts, especially around Webflow. You've definitely converted me to be, I have not built a WordPress site, I think, since we started working together. We've transitioned to Webflow, and you've been able to, one, be sort of an evangelist of it, but two, you're the one doing 99% of the work on the Webflow side of things. I think I've connected our system to Webflow, and that's about all I've had to touch.
Yeah, so I am kind of obsessed with Webflow. It's kind of how I always imagined developing a website should be. Like it's far more intuitive, and as like as a designer-y type person, I'm not a designer by any means, but I feel like I have reasonable taste at least for that. And it's far easier to implement something that looks good and functions well and is super fast just using Webflow.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about, how we've approached or landed on the cadence, the drive, the sort of process for building product. And this might be a little bit more technical, but the goal is try to, let people know what our dynamics like, which I think works. So a little bit about my background. I've been a software engineer for, 15, 20 years or so. I started in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, building websites for people and, going in a totally different direction. I was in college. So I was, in school to be a musician. I ended up getting a music business degree. But by the, second year of undergrad, I had a nice business building my music professors' websites because nobody had websites back in the day. And so from there, you just started, moving on and on, getting more technical. I moved to New York, and that was kind of a big shift where I just built software. I just ended up getting a bunch of freelance gigs, and it was at the time, a mix of technologies. And the idea of a startup was pretty foreign at the time. But fast forward 15 years from there, I had built an agency, ended up selling it. So I've been a manager, but I've always been sort of this player coach mentality where I'm still writing code from a day-to-day perspective, but I, had put a team together and picked up the one doing all the lead gen and the development of our business. So, but then I sold the business, and, since then I was working at a venture fund, which is how I met Colin. And, he and I sort of started talking about audio, the audio economy. And really, I think the first leap into this business was like, hey, we have to build something. So I think that was like the place I wanted to start, which was like finding a technical co-founder is always a hot topic. It's, there's tons of people with great ideas, but, they can't build it. And the idea of raising a bunch of money and running a tech project is, in my prior career as running a development shop, we would love to talk to people who would give us, $50,000, $100,000 to build their V1 of their platform. And we quickly found that the solo CEO, or even, a CEO with a team, and sometimes even technical, they really didn't know how to run the process and what to expect. So they would kind of put down their requirements on a napkin or lay out their vision for us. And that was a lot of my initial work, which we didn't really do in this process. There wasn't a design sprint. There wasn't a bunch of wireframes. I think the V1 of the Avocado app, and I don't know, I think there was no backend. I think we just put audio files on S3 and it made the mobile app read from a static bucket. There was no database, no login. So I think I just found sort of a React Native template that was for learning, and it smashed it in with a audio player. And, you'll have to tell me your perspective, but I feel like we said we wanted to basically build the podcast app, the Apple podcast app, similar functionality. And that was the first launch of it. Curious from your perspective, when that launched, like, because I didn't share anything. I just kind of shared, hey, this is what I'm going to do. When you got the first test light build, I don't know, what was your experience of that?
My biggest experience was like, wow, I was shocked how quickly you got that out there and how like functional it was. Like it hit kind of all the basic features that we wanted in that first version. And whether that was, the proper strategy or not, I was generally impressed. I thought the design needed some work, as all this stuff probably still does and will for a long time. But yeah, I was pretty impressed by the whole process. And I want to say, like, generally we'd share examples of other things we liked, as like we'd find stuff on Dribble and we would pass in that back and forth as like basic designs or other apps and like features we liked from that. So that is probably how we cobbled together the general idea, more so than wireframing anything.
Yeah. So, when I think about this, it's, and by the way, thank you for being impressed. I love hearing when people are impressed with me, but let's keep talking about that. No, in all seriousness, I think there's an approach, like, had you gone through the traditional route of, let's say you paid for an agency to build it, you probably would have seen like a bunch of drawings and designs, and this would have taken a lot longer. But, we're taking the startup approach, and it's like, let's just get something out. Let's get it in our hands. Let's use it. Let's see how it functions. Let's put it in other people's hands. And from there, I think we built a back end for things. And then I think the first big push after having the basic app up was, how do we get people on the platform? And we've talked about this a little bit more, but we started this iteration process. And that first iteration after the initial build was, how do we get audio on here? And so that was reaching out to people on Udemy and making an easy way for them to upload their video files, converting them to audio, and boom, they have an audio course. So, while that's not the direction we are after now, we were able to add a ton of people to the platform. But the reason I bring this up is, like, we just kind of discovered a dynamic that I think works well. I think we started putting, feature ideas in Trello, prioritizing them based on, what do we think is the most important thing? Like, there's the quadrant, right? The high cost, high value, low cost, basically look at things, or what's the lowest hanging fruit. And that's what we would always tackle. And I think most startups go this route, even if they are paying somebody or they, hire a developer. But the big thing that I learned in my early career, and I would give this as a piece of advice to founders out there, that, if you don't have a technical co-founder, or even if you do, is to deliver something like every week or every other week, even if it's not that impressive, or if it's a minor change or even a single feature, is to, like, get in the cadence of shipping something every week or two. And I think that helps. Because I think, as I look back, we're working on something right now where it is taken longer than I'd like, or a feature that takes maybe 3 weeks. And if you don't show and tell every now and then, you can kind of get away from the actual feature you're trying to build. Like, maybe you overbuild. There's a handful of thoughts around this using sort of the agile methodology, but just showing and telling every 2 weeks is a good method to be in. That's something that we drilled in at the agency I ran, is like, you gotta show that stuff. So that's my one piece of feedback. I think deciding what to build is the other big question that I think we still struggle with. Like, we don't have a perfect record of everything that we built gets used. I don't know, when you think about what goes into Trello, I know there's one that, having features that we get feedback from customers, that's definitely the highest priority. Things that we maybe think is, this feature is missing, or maybe a competitor has it. How do you think about, what to build next?
So the easiest way that I know is just to become like a power user of the product. So that's what I'm doing now. I have 2 courses in there, 2 audio courses, and I'm working on another one that I'll finish this week in all likelihood and start pushing out. And then you just bump into it as you spend more and more time with the product. Like, oh God, this is a little confusing. I wish this was here instead of there. Or like, I kind of really need these features to start getting some volume on the courses. That was like all the integrations with Facebook and Reddit ads and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then like conversion rate optimization and changing the landing pages slightly. I think of it that way. And then I probably generally, like, I don't like to fire off hot takes or anything. I don't like to hop on the phone and be like, Brent, this should be this and this should be that. I like to think about it quite a bit. And then I kind of write it in my notes app. I send it to you on Trello, or I send it to you on Slack, which I'm trying to move away from. I don't like to, fire things off on Slack too often. So I think Trello gives me the opportunity to really formulate stuff. So, I don't waste any of your time building something that doesn't seem impactful.
Yeah, I would say I definitely appreciate that. And I would, let's talk about that for a second, of like how to deliver feedback. Trello's great. I think anecdotal feedback can be annoying. Like, I've not gotten any from you, but I'm drawing on past experience with either clients or people that, even send text messages of like, why does this work this way? It's like, it's different when you're co-founders, because I do feel like there's a lot more of a direct communication. But again, for those out there that are listening to this, that maybe hired an agency or a single developer or went with an Upwork or whatever to get your V1 out, and you're trying to, you get that first version in your hands, you're trying to figure out, how do I deliver my feedback? It's like getting on a call is probably the best bet. That's, and we talk twice a week, on a regular cadence, usually more, but, writing down your feedback is great. Firing that off in email or Slack is not so great, just because it will be misinterpreted likely. But like, put a document together, walk through it on a screen share, give feedback. I think we work well with this. Like, there is generally this idea that an understanding that neither one of us necessarily know what is right. And then you can use evidence, like other products as evidence, as like, hey, I'm a big fan of this, is let's look at like Instagram. How do they do login? How do they do forgot password? All the patterns that everyone's used to. It's just like, find a company that's out there that has a good experience and copy it. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a good way to build, standards and conventions. But going back to delivering feedback, I think that can create some tension where, and again, I want to put on the hat of like that some people are being the client and some people are being the vendor, is if you didn't put a bunch of time into mapping out and writing requirements, and you're basically, as you see the product, that's how the feedback gets generated. That can be a really wasteful way to build a product. So it's like, you and I may talk through those requirements and initial features of like, hey, it's going to be like this app, but for this, or, that's going to look differently in both of our minds, and the details will come out once you get it in your hand. And instead of, putting a long list of changes, which is good for your own use, don't send that. I think it may be more effective to, catalog everything, but go through it on a call, and just go into it knowing that unless you did already give that detailed feedback, which usually most people do not, there really are 2 ways of building technology. One is to do a full set of requirements up front, and you can read your Microsoft Code Complete analysis of this, which there have been studies. It's like, which one is the more effective way, like the quote unquote agile way of, let's come up with an understanding for the next 2 weeks, work on that, and then reassess, and then come up with an understanding for the next 2 weeks, and then set shorter hurdles, versus let's spend 8 months writing a binder full of requirements and hand that off to a developer. Let's not, get into that, but those are the 2 different methodologies, I think, from a high level.
Are they, I mean, are they really two viable alternatives? It seems it's agile versus waterfall, right? And isn't everyone
Right.
using agile?
I don't know. I think there are systems out there, avionics, the more, I mean, for a startup that's building an audio storefront, probably no one's going to use waterfall. But here's where it gets goofy, where if you are a founder, you've got this idea, and then you hire an agency, and they're probably going to do agile. They can't really give you an end price. So you're going to say, hey,
Hmm.
I want to get this done at this price. And they're going to say, great, we're going to make some estimates, but we can't guarantee it, or we'll have a not to exceed value, which once they exceed it, you're going to, have a conversation about it, which you might be able to get done for some price. But that's where the tension is introduced, is if you have to deal with, finite resources, you may say, hey, well, I'll go back and I'll sharpen my pencil and I'll draw up every screen and I'll draw up every functionality. And so there is a tendency to create waterfall work product in order to limit cost or have a
Mhm.
better understanding of cost. But, in general, most people realize, like, hey, let's break this into smaller pieces and as more, what I call this, like, immersive, or sorry, not immersive, emergent requirements gathering, which was what I call how I work in general, right? It's like the requirements will emerge as we use the product. And I think that's a fair way to expect people to work with things, to just understand there's some unknowns. But the reason I left that business, or the agency, one of the biggest reasons was this, is like, I have to basically give an estimate to a client. And if we go over, that's on me. And if we go under, that's, same deal. So it's sort of gambling. So anyways, there are people, I think, still doing things waterfall. I'd imagine, like, and I'm speaking out of turn, I don't know for a fact, I imagine things like, Excel, the building of Excel, things are going to be run in a little bit more structured process. There is a benefit to it, but it requires all parties to be super involved and engaged in the first months. And again, months without a work product, with, you're going to map everything out. I
Yeah.
remember having somebody on my team back when I had the agency, and they came from that environment where they were handed a binder. I think they had worked at Fidelity or something, and they were handed a binder of requirements, and they seemed to, when working with me, kind of expect that, of like, hey, I can't be held accountable to these requirements. You're kind of throwing them at me. Nothing's written down. Other companies have worked that way, and I think some of them still do. And if you have those resources, but they generally don't fit for startups. By the
Yeah.
time you write your requirements binder, those months, the market has changed, and you should have shipped something. But
There's
yeah,
just so much ambiguity for like what we're building. It doesn't, it's just completely uncharted territories doing these audio courses. And,
yeah,
both of us are just operating with our kind of best guess of what this should be or should look like.
I think that's a really good point. I think then the other thing that, like, we actually haven't talked about, we should, use this time to air our grievances. But, like, as you mentioned, you go through, and I know that you do, and I appreciate it, but you seem to go through feedback gathering and prioritization in order to save the developer time, or in our case, my time. It's like, I can be working on new features. It's like, as two co-founders, we both know we're working on this project. From a development perspective, it tends to be more tangible to say, okay, well, there's a mobile app, there's probably an amount of time there, the web app, the back end, whatever other chunks of work that we've put together. But I wonder if that, and I've observed it before, but I'd like to think that I haven't participated in it too much, but that this, like, prima donna attitude of, like, the developer time is worth everything because that's the only thing that's generating work product. But I'm curious what your perspective is around it, because I mean, I would say I have a lot of appreciation for, the flexibility we have, and you're always trying to put things together in a way that's complete and not like, hey, here's an idea, go figure it out. But that's my perspective of this dynamic, and I think it's something to strive for, right? But again, I've seen situations where the developer time is precious, but then the developer effectiveness can go down as well when you have sort
Hmm.
of this, I expect everything to be prepared for me, and I expect you guys to do all the testing, and, like, the work burden could easily shift off of my plate, and I'd say, oh, there's an opportunity for a developer to sort of segment themselves off and put themselves in a little bit of an ivory tower. But curious your perspective or experience with it.
Yeah, I would say every startup I've ever been a part of, like the developer time was the most precious. So you kind of want to get the most out of them. And I guess I brought that over here to some extent. If you have more business skills than maybe the average developer, or definitely the average developer. So like you could do some of the stuff that I do, but I can't really do any of the stuff that you're doing. So like I am pretty cognizant of that, and I try to make the most of your time. So maybe I tackle, or at least say I'll tackle more than I should. I don't know if that's what you're like trying to get at. Like,
No. I'm just saying it's it's something we haven't talked about. I mean, for the listeners out there, this isn't we're trying to have a Ricky Lake moment or Jerry Springer moment or something, but I think it's a dynamic that everyone has to work through. It's like and some people talk about it explicitly. I think some co-founders, are in an environment where they show up to obviously with COVID, we haven't, I think the last time I saw you was probably a couple of months ago, like face to face, but
yeah,
having that physical location, maybe, remove some of this stuff and it could be more apparent of like, you're sitting next to each other for 6 months at a time. And it's obvious that what people are working on and how they're spending their time and, what's going into something that's fruitful versus not. I mean, because I know the reason for bringing this up is in part, as I know that there have been features that I felt passionate about, like, or I feel like we're missing, like ratings. So we added ratings. It kind of went into the app update not too long ago. Maybe this was a couple months. It was definitely before we pivoted, but you could rate the course. And it's like, I spent a week on that. I don't know. I mean, I had to build the back end, had to build the front end, had to build, there's an email functionality to it to prompt you for a rating. It was a couple days of work, but like, was that the best use of time? I mean, I'm looking right now. Not a lot of people have used that rating feature. It's kind of buried.
yeah. So
it's,
that came up because we had a creator that's like, hey, I'd really like to get feedback on my courses. I think that is kind of a core piece of selling a product and getting feedback. So hasn't been used that much yet, but it will be used, I think, in the future. I think it's like a core piece of selling any product.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. There are a handful of things that I feel like we're just starting from nothing. So there's a lot of stuff, like, had there been a platform that we could build on, that would have been one of the things that I already had. But that's just part of building your own platform, is you really do have to start from scratch. And, our user system and our creator system, purchases, everything's kind of hand rolled, which I think we should talk about that. It might be one of the last points, but I think we should talk about what is it like today to, we're almost 1 year into like prototyping from the point I think we started prototyping things. I'm just trying to think of, like, had you done it now, is there a way to have done this with like a no code or an existing platform? And I don't think there's been anything change, except for I did get to try out DraftBit, which is basically like a Webflow for mobile apps. And I'm wondering if maybe that would have helped us speed things along slightly.
So a year ago, they're a startup as well. They've raised a little bit of money, and I think we're both friends with all the folks over there. They were not as far along as they are today. So maybe it's credible opportunity, but it was very expensive back then. When I was talking to the team, it was like 10 to 20K to even like think about doing your first iteration with them, because it's much more like using developer resources over there, basically.
Got it.
Potentially it's, I don't know if it's approaching being like a Webflow for
it feels
apps.
like that. I was really impressed. I didn't spend a ton of time and I didn't publish anything. So it's run, it seems like on very similar architecture that we are, basically a React Native application. So that's like I'm writing JavaScript and it produces out, an iOS application, Android application. They're using a technology called Expo, which is built on, part of the React Native ecosystem. And the interface I know Webflow now really well. I felt right at home. I knew exactly where to go for everything. And again, I only just played around a little bit. That would be one thing. I guess in terms of a backend, it still seems like something you'd have to, I can't think of, registration, user system to do the things we would need to. But that's one thing I try to see. I think my tendency tends to be, let's build it from scratch. And, that's what I'm good at. But it can also be super wasteful if some of these things already exist.
Yeah, I guess I looked at doing this a little bit before talking with you more and deciding to pursue this of like, how would you kind of prove that there's demand for audio courses? And I think you could just make your own audio course. You sell it basically like a paid podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a perfect example, but you could prove there's demand there. And maybe from that, intrigue like a CTO or a developer or raise money based on that. And then you could have pursued, the bigger project,
Yeah.
which we kind of maybe did in reverse. And now I'm building an audio course, even though I didn't really want to do that. But I still feel like it's kind of the way to test the product. So
Yeah. Dog fooding is one of the, I think, central thoughts around building your own product. You have to be one of the power users. You have to be in the thick of it. I guess that might be one other thing was like right when we started launching, I think I'm trying to get better at this is like writing better release notes. Cause I'll just say, hey, this, by the time I'm done building the feature and I ship it, I'm like tired and exhausted. And then it's like, here you go. When really at the end, I need to put a video together. Like, here's how you find it in the admin. Here's how you use it. Here's, it's some of the things are slightly apparent, like, the early stuff, but as we progress, things are getting more and more complicated and in depth, and that's a normal progression, right? It's like we're not even talking about tech debt yet, which is another interesting sort of tech related conversation. But for an early stage company, you start with 0 customers. You don't want to overbuild anything. You want to get to market as fast as possible and then start working around that. And so everything is easy to build at first and fast to build at first. And so once you surpass that 1 year, certain amount of users, you start to run into, okay, well, we can't change that because I'm going to have to, everything starts to become more and more interconnected, which is, where some of the more modern thought around software development comes in. It's like, okay, you now have a real system, and this is a whole other subject, but what's your approach to testing, unit testing, and how we tackle testing is, hey, I've launched something, put it on staging or production, give it a shot, see how it works, and we'll kind of watch the system carefully, which I think is a good way for an early stage company at our scale to handle releases, but it quickly gets more complicated as the user base grows.
Yeah. And we talked about this in the previous podcast, just like set it live. And so you always do the staging thing. It seems to always work out pretty well, but there is a bunch of feedback there that is good to, I guess, implement.
Yeah. I just don't want to deploy something and then it's like 7 o'clock and I'm, winding down and relaxing. And then I get notifications when errors happen on the system. Those, generally chill my blood when I see those come through. Oh God, what happened? Did you break something? Because it's a hard thing to do with a 2-person team. I mean, we have some extra help with Taylor. I mean, she's been super helpful in, just giving a fresh perspective. And yeah, I mean, another part is starting to build up. We were working on that and I kind of abandoned it. And it's on me, is like building up a beta testing group, a group of power users that we have that we send new releases to. That is a great strategy, but I've been kind of poor about organizing that. But so far, so good. I mean, I think a lot of our system has been proven by real users that are, like the big, larger paid cohorts that are coming through with like, these 200 to 300 user groups that, okay, if we run into 2 or 3 emails of people running into errors, that's a pretty good average. And that ended up being the way things went. I feel like the approach that we've been taking for testing has been good, maybe a little too cautious, but I'd rather, for my own sanity, rather err on that side than the other.
Absolutely. So I would say things have been like actually shockingly solid, right? With bringing on these cohorts of like 200 to 300 people, and not like 200 to 300 tech savvy folks. Like these are just a random sampling of a financial company or something like that. And so it's like, I don't know, the most basic web browsing folks, and they are running into like pretty minor issues and often figuring it out. So that is a pretty big endorsement for them.
Yeah, no, that went really well. And so far all those groups have gone really well. And so the thing that gives me the most anxiety is we sell somebody on this, they're going to introduce it to their group. So we are therefore a reflection. If our system doesn't work, their product doesn't work, their services don't work. So we have to hold ourselves to a little bit higher standard. And thankfully, I think our biggest problem has been UX. It hasn't been necessarily like a code problem. It's been hey, they're going through a flow that maybe doesn't make sense, or we didn't really think it through the right way from their context. So they're getting lost along the way. And of that, it's been, maybe 5 to 10 people of a 300 person group that, are confused. And so we make up for that by having great customer service. Customer
Absolutely.
support. Yeah. No, I mean, this is part of the thing. I mean, I feel like we're doing pretty good when it comes to, communication, which I think is probably the hardest part between a technical co-founder and non-technical co-founder, is like a good, communicative working relationship that doesn't get into like, I think, I've been in some where not so much a co-founder, but just working on part of a team where it's like, if the founder that, and again, it's like, who's taking tech leadership? There seems to be more of like, we're both kind of pushing this boulder up the hill, versus somebody on the team sometimes will take full control and then own all of, a certain domain. And then as the product grows, how do you decide how to chip that apart and kind of pull it from their hands? And those can be kind of tough transitions as the company grows, but it's all part of the fun.
Part of the fun.
Yeah. So I think that's probably it for, I don't know how I would title this episode, but just, dynamics between tech co-founder and non-technical co-founder, and some tips to, be successful.
Yeah. On that note, thanks for listening. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.